Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I'm joined today by Parker and James M. Hewitt.
Hello.
From Warcradle Studios to talk about Armoured Clash, and this time we're going to be diving into the design of the game. Armoured Clash theoretically existed in an earlier version of Dystopian Wars, but this is not a supplement or an expansion to Dystopian Wars as it was previously. This is a whole new game. So do you want to tell us a bit about it, Parker, how it comes around and slots into the Dystopian Age? Because this is the third, essentially, different scale within that world now.
So people will hopefully already know Dystopian Wars, which is a naval fleet battle game, 1/1200 scale. There will be some people who remember the original Armoured Clash, which was the same scale, and it was essentially the same game, but you could play it on land as well. We just kind of felt that the amount of people who could play both games together were minimal, because you have to be on a beach with my land dudes and your naval dudes, or in a fjord, or in a big lake, or wherever else you're going to be. It just felt like, well, let's make it its own thing, and then you can focus on what makes a game of that scale different and unique and kind of gives it its own feeling. And also, one of the other things in the original game was you had tokens for infantry, and because you can't see them at the tiny scale. So actually having 10 mil dudes against tanks, you get a real sense of scale and how big the force bit before you is. I was going to say, it gives us a real chance to really focus down on what makes a 10mm scale game different from a 28, different from a naval battle.
That's one of the big key things is, when you think of this period of time, warfare happening, you think of big ranks of infantry, all that sort of thing. And I think it would have been missing a trick to not have, big lines of infantry, especially when, at a 10 mil scale, you can really get a lot of character into the miniatures, like the crown rifles, for example. They are all very much individuals, even though there's 4 to a base and they're quite little, and I'm not going to be, painting the eyes or anything, but they are very much, they've all got a lot of movement, a lot of character. And I think that's true of the entire range. We've zoomed into a level where you can really get a feel for how different units act, how they look, what they're made of, all that sort of thing. And so, yeah, it's that lovely midpoint between the mass, zoomed out scale of Dystopian Wars and the very detailed, granular, zoomed in scale of Wild West Exodus. So hopefully it's occupying a really nice niche that wasn't previously filled in the range.
I suppose with moving from 1/1200 to 10 mils, what,
1/160, I think.
All right, yeah. Yeah, by that neck of the woods, between 150 and 160. A weapon, a small arm, that a rifle or what have you, that an infantry would carrying, you have a bit of variation at the 10 mil scale that you might not have at the Dystopian Wars scale, where small arms would be more or less identical across the board for range and type as well. So you add a bit of difference and granularity into the factions then.
It certainly gives us some levers to pull. I mean, we've had days in the dev team, Parker, you've been there, where we've got a whiteboard out and gone, right, how do we compare all these kinds of different weapons? And sometimes there's a difference of 2 inches of range, or, one more die at this point, whatever else. But yeah, like I say, it gives you that lever to pull to sort of say, well, this is different from this in this way, which when you pull out and, an entire platoon of infantry as a token, you don't care. Whereas here, you can start having those interesting little characterful things.
And that kind of leads on to the idea of you're a general of your force, right? You're kind of at the back looking at your army arrayed in front of you, giving them orders, sending them off to do things. And there will be slight differences, of course, but it's not as super granular as a 28 mil, 32 mil game like Wild West Exodus, where each individual guy has got a different weapon and they all act differently. And it's just a really nice sweet spot that you can feel, here I am, grand, sitting in on the top of my horse, telling people what to do as they go off and die in my name.
Proper armchair general.
Yeah.
Is there a DNA then that's shared between Dystopian Wars and Armoured Clash, or is it something that's entirely new and bespoke for 10 mil?
There's little traces. There's a few things that you'll sort of see and go, oh, that's done similarly. That's done, in a way that is reminiscent. Like, for example, so we've got a custom dice system in Armoured Clash for resolving attacks, and It's a different custom dice system to what you see in Dystopian Wars, but there's an element of exploding dice, for example. There's some stuff which is, a Dystopian Wars player will be able to pick it up and go, oh, okay, that's kind of similar. But again, to be clear, it is a completely brand new game built from the ground up. It's not an expansion to Dystopian Wars, as some people might wonder, because, as you said, way back, the original Armoured Clash brand was for an expansion to Dystopian Wars. Now, this is completely new, but, it's come from a studio that has been making Dystopian Wars, so there's a lot of influence in there. So hopefully people will, spot the differences, but also enjoy the similarities.
James makes a really good point about exploding dice. In Dystopian Wars, when you're rolling a handful of dice, if you get a heroic hit, then it will explode, and then you can continue to explode that dice, because on a ship, you've got various malfunctioning parts and all these things. You can hit an ammo crash and, create a cascading effect that causes huge damage to the ship, right? Mm-hmm. In Armoured Clash, where you've got people and tanks, you might get a special hit on something, so you will be rolling an extra heroic dice, but it doesn't then continue to explode, because that kind of doesn't make narrative sense on that scale. And sure. That's been such a fun part of the design process, to kind of figure out what a 10 mil scale game that we want to make is, and how that kind of, some things we can take and go, that works well in this, we'll use that, and some things we just like, no, that doesn't work, so we won't use it. And it's just been a joy to kind of sit down and make those decisions.
All three of the Dystopian Age games have got a card deck that accompanies them and is an intrinsic part of the gameplay. How does it function with Armoured Clash then? Is it similar to what we've seen with Wild West Exodus and Dystopian Wars? Sort of a multi-faceted deck of cards, if you will.
Yeah, so in a lot of ways, it's similar to the cards we've already got in Wild West Exodus and Dystopian Wars, in that each card has got two halves. So you've got a command and a conquest half. And you have a hand of cards, and you can play a card from your hand to use a command, to issue a command to one of your units. There's certain caveats, like a unit's got to have an officer or be within range of one of your commanders if their officer's currently resting, shall we say. Maybe sleeping off, some heavy gunfire. And you can play that to kind of bend the rules, get some cool little bonuses. That's great. Alternatively, you can play a card, flip it upside down and play the conquest objective to get some victory points, having done a cool thing. And so you have this, if you don't want to kind of scrape for victory points, you can quite freely use your command cards. But if you're lagging behind a little bit, you're going to have to, rely on maybe strategy and tactics more than fancy special rules. So it adds an interesting element to the decision space in the game. And like the conquest objectives will never be the way you probably win a game outright. You always have to focus on your main objectives that you get from the clash you're playing or from wiping out enemy units. But they're a good little leg up. The other way the cards get used is every card's got a value in the top corner from 1 to 12. Mm-hmm. And whenever one of your units takes a discipline test, say, for example, you need to see if they're going to get suppressed from enemy fire, if they're going to fall back, whatever else, you draw the top card of your deck and you compare it to their discipline value. If it's equal to or lower, they're all okay. The upshot of this is that as the more discipline tests you're taking, so the worse things are kind of going for you, the quicker that deck is depleting. When your deck runs out, it'll reshuffle, but you can no longer draw cards into your hand. So similarly, when you draw a card at the start of a round, you have the ability to discard some from your hand before you do so. So you can get rid of ones you don't want. But every card that is in your hand can only be there once, because once it's back in the discard, it's not coming back into your hand at all. And so, especially in bigger games, this is going to create a real, interesting sort of risk-reward thing, I think, for players. And certainly it can lead to some tense moments when you realize you've really wasted your cards early, and now your communications are broken down, your chain of command is failing, and the enemy is going to really make you pay for it.
And that's a fun narrative thing as well, right? In that your army becomes tired and kind of they start picking off the runners, and so actually how am I going to get these guys together, all that kind of stuff. And it's when narrative feeds into the gameplay, that is mwah.
It lends an awful lot to the actual tactical and strategic makeup of your force, because you can go heavy early, push for a lot of cards to do, like you say, bend the rules in specific limited ways to help you achieve a goal, get a load of extra victory points early game. But then once that deck is burnt, it just becomes morale. And if your opponent has been sitting on theirs, holding back, then the tide swings towards them. So if you burn cards, you need to make sure that it's worth burning I suppose. So, yeah. Oh, I'd love that. That's well done. Can I ask a quick question about the 10 mil scale then? So obviously, if you were playing it in the 1200, they would just be tokens, and it's just a very different makeup of things. But in picking 10 mil, did you think about other scales first, maybe 6 or 15 or 20? Because obviously there's a lot of scales and play within the range between your Wild West Exodus and your Dystopian Wars. And some of them lend themselves to different types of games. Or was it just a case of going, this is the type of game we want to make and 10 mil would work best for us in this situation?
That is a big part of it, essentially, that you're kind of going, well, 6 mil, okay, you could do 6 mil, but then you can't really see the people, right? And this is a game about infantry and tanks. It's not a tank game with a few infantry units. It's not an infantry game with a couple of tanks. It's the goal is that it wants to cover both of those kind of aspects of gameplay. And so you want to make the individual soldiers big enough that you can see them on the tabletop and they look cool, right? But also you don't want to make them so big that then, well, it might as well be going up to a 28 mil. Like 15 mil's great. Actually, then you'd need a much bigger table to play it on, and all these kind of things. They're all spiraling decisions that if you do that, then this. And 10 mil just fit that really sweet. A guy is yay big, a tank is yay big, a big behemoth, which are your huge war machines. They look big and impressive without being like super unwieldy, and you can't really take one because it's far too big, or kind of doesn't matter because it's too small. And it was just a really nice. It just felt right, I guess. And I think that's a big part of any kind of design of this kind. You want it to feel right. I know that's a bit of a loosey-goosey way of saying things, but it's a bigger part, I think, than people realise.
Yeah. And I think as well, because of the setting we've got, it's a historical adjacent setting. A lot of the infantry and vehicles and things will look fairly similar at a small scale. So if you were doing a 6 mil scale, you wouldn't have the opportunity that we have at 10 to really make, the Alliance look different from the Imperium, look different from the Union, and so on and so forth. So because we don't have, it's not like a sci-fi game where you can go, oh, this alien race is all big and tall. This one's really chunky. They're humans. They're all humans at the end of the day. Well, mostly. And I think that's a thing that, as you say, at 10 mil you can do. Also, what I love is when you look at these miniatures, they're sculpted at a 10 mil scale. They're not a thing that's been kind of designed at a different scale and shrunk or whatever else. I mean, in a couple of cases, there are things which are, you can see them very, very small on a Dystopian Wars, like Landing Token, for example. But overall, they've been sculpted entirely at this scale, which means they are designed to be painted at this scale. They're an absolute joy. They've got just the right level of detail, the right depth of detail to be really fun to paint.
Talking about the miniatures and the scale, and you were saying, Parker, that it's not just a tank game with infantry added or vice versa. You've really lent into the combined arms aspect, more so than probably the 1870s or thereabouts would lend itself. It feels more like a Napoleonic-style grand army sort of conflict on the tabletop. Was that part and parcel of the feel you wanted to give the game, that picking the right tool for the right job and not just letting somebody go, well, I can have flying space tanks, so I'm just going to take flying space tanks and we'll win everything?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's frustrating sometimes in games where you can just have your most points expensive thing and it's just the best at stuff, right? Whereas I've never been in an actual war, but I've seen it on the telly. Like, it is a combined arms thing. Yeah, you need infantry to take buildings and all this kind of stuff. And that was a huge part of kind of making sure that the game felt right. And also, as you say about being Napoleonic, right? It's set in this 1870X. It's got that kind of Napoleonic feel, but it's an alternate history, and science and technology and engineering has advanced massively. So actually they've got closer to probably World War I/World War II tanks. But they've also got some weird super sciencey things. So how do you kind of then make sure that marries up? And one of the key things, and probably one of my favorite things in the system is, because you're at this 10 mil scale, you don't want individual weapons for individual guys, right? But you can have light attacks that will affect light targets, and you will have heavy attacks that affect heavy targets, and you cannot use one against the other. You might have a tank that has got amazing, like a rail gun, say, that's so good at armor piercing, it will just go straight through a tank and cause it to explode. Great. Of course, if you fire that at a dude, you'll turn that one dude into pink mist, but then what? And actually, vice versa, you're going to have infantry with small arms. They're just going to ping off tanks, no bother at all. And so it doesn't force you to have a balanced list, but you're kind of like, okay, so I'll take infantry to hold this objective because only infantry can hold objectives. Okay, well, if they're just there and then some tanks come around the corner, well, I can't affect the tanks with my infantry because I don't have the correct attacks. So in that case, I need to take tanks to support them. Right, okay, but what if they've got artillery over there? Or maybe I'll put some dudes in APCs and they can move up and take those guys. And it's just, you kind of start thinking, and again, not a real soldier, you kind of start having that armchair general thing of like, what am I going to take? Because it will be useful, not because it's the best thing in my list and I'll take 12.
Yeah,
and that
absolutely.
To me, that's been such a joy to work on.
I think, the fact that, as you say, every unit has multiple attacks. And sometimes you go, well, actually, this unit I've got just cannot hurt that thing. And so you have to use that combined arms. I think it ties in, though, with the way the miniatures are sold. The way you're going to get the miniatures in the box is you're not buying a unit at a time. You're buying a frame with a whole bunch of stuff on it. So, for example, the Crown heavy frame has got a couple of your main battle tanks, like your Galahads, which can also be, Galahad breaches or Tristan armored transports. You've got some dragoons, who are your light walker units. You've got your cavalry. You've got all sorts of different things on there, field guns. So you're getting a whole bunch of stuff at a time on the one sprue. And we've then kind of built the army construction around that to a degree. So obviously you can tweak it and reinforce units, whatever else. But as a new player, you can just go, hey, give me one of each box set. That's a decent starting army. Thank you very much. Sure. Which is such a great thing, I think, for a new player coming in. I mean, I've started a lot of games over the years, and I'm sure we all have. And that kind of, what is my first step? That's such an important thing. And we've carried that over into things like the rulebook design. So the rulebook for Armoured Clash is, I think, just a leap forward in terms of ease of use, how it teaches the game, how easy it is to use as a reference. We've been driving ourselves mad looking at page numbers. We've been, every page has got a little box out with like footnotes directing you to other bits of the rulebook that are useful, and getting those page numbers right has been fun.
See page XX.
Yeah, exactly. But it's so worth it, I think. And it means that people can jump around the rulebook and, look at the bits that they need to see nice and easily. We've got lovely tables in the back and a full index. We really wanted to make sure that this game appeals to people who are existing fans of the setting and like Dystopian Wars and Wild West Exodus, but also newcomers to the setting or newcomers to wargaming. I think this Armoured Clash is a fantastic first game for anyone. And I will stake my reputation on that.
That's a really good point about it being a gamer's first game.
Yeah.
In that there's very little in the way of maths, things like that, because we've got the custom dice. You've got your although there's a chart, but it's like a neutral attack and improved, or a weakened attack, and that will be affected by various
quickly.
things.
Yeah.
Yes, super easy to learn. There's very little in the way of I'm plus this but minus this other thing, and then divide it by my birthday. There's not a lot of that going on. It's just you can just get in and play it, which is, I've loved running demos when you get halfway through the demo and then they take over because they've got it, and it's like, well, that's what you want, right?
It shows a lot then that the game is accessible to new players, but have you still aimed for that balance that veteran players would expect? Because you'll get a lot of people who will look at this, go, I'd love to play this as a campaign in a narrative sense, and you'll get another group of players that will go, tournament, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 3-day tournament. I want the balance to be there as well. So has it been difficult in sort of squaring that circle, so to speak, to get a game that's accessible and fun to play for narrative and beginners, but also has the tactical nuance for the sort of the hardcore tournament players? And there will be plenty of them out there.
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, I think it's the, you know, threading that needle is always a challenge with a war game, because it's, you know, wargaming is an expansive hobby. You've got such a range of different things, and just say for a new player, it's often hard to know where to start. But what you want is that kind of that depth and that grit that can really pull in the more experienced players. And yeah, I mean, I'm not going to toot our own trumpet too much, but I think we've done a really solid job of ensuring that. Like when you've got things like different battle groups that let you assemble your force in different ways. You've got all the stuff you can do with the cards. You've got a whole lot of like strategic, you know, granularity, a lot of interesting things you can do in a game. I think that even before you introduce things like campaign rules, leveling up, any of that stuff that might come down the line later, because to be clear, that's not in the core rule set. I think there is plenty here to be getting on with and trying, you know, a lot of different things out. I mean, I know a lot of people that are fans of historical gaming that will probably enjoy this because it's got that similar kind of scope to it. I know people who are big narrative gamers, and I think at this scale, I think narrative really comes into its own, because you can, you know, compared to when you zoom out more like Dystopian Wars, you can play a campaign, but here you're getting the character, you're getting individual, you know, unit leaders even that you can see on the battlefield. And I think this is a game that's going to appeal to a lot of different people.
And long term as well, I think that I want to say we're lucky, but it was an intentional choice in that all of the Orbats and such will be free to download. So that way, you know, it's not you're getting a book, you're waiting 2-3 years for your new book to come. Oh man, my team sucks or whatever, and now you've got to kind of deal with that, right? I don't know exactly how often we'll be doing it, but there will be revisions and kind of, you know, as new factions and new things are released, we can kind of make slight tweaks, and then that's all going to be free to download. So I think for that kind of tournament balanced player, they're going to be supported long term, which is, I mean, that just feels really good. I mean, and again, as James was saying about campaign stuff, we won't necessarily have organized play straight out the gate, but that is definitely something we'll be looking at in the near future.
I take it then that all of the factions that currently exist for Dystopian Wars will be getting a land-based force at some point then.
I think, yeah. So the big eight, the great powers. I was about to try to list them all off then, but I'm not going to. But that's a whole risk, right? I'll forget one. But the great powers will all have a place. We've got in the back of the rulebook, we've got a lovely chunky section for each one. Parker's written some great stuff for it. Ed on our team has been doing some amazing work in there. Stu, who has been around for a long time. Everyone has kind of contributed to this rulebook in the team, and we've got some lovely narrative on each of the 8 great powers. And yeah, the plan is, you know, before we start releasing anything more for the ones that are coming out at launch, we're going to try to, you know, get all 8 to a basic level so that people can kind of pick the one they already know and love and start playing. And it won't be immediate because these things take time, but it'll certainly, we're not hanging around. You know, we've got the Crown of the Empire at launch, and the Union not far after that. And then who knows?
Interesting. I'm
There's good stuff coming.
Yeah, I'm going to be picking Chris's brain later on about some of the design choices as well. So people may get sneak peeks of some of the other bits and pieces that are coming. So presumably then it will follow not an identical, but a similar route that Dystopian Wars did, where the factions got their releases, they got their sort of their typical fleets that they would field. And then recently we've seen the more esoteric or small factions within those nations that are coming to the fore. So the Templars or popping out and people like that. So is there the potential, or is that sort of a route you want to follow where you'll see the Crown and then maybe 2 years down the line or whatever, you'll see the Commonwealth getting a little bit of a like Indian and Canada specific faction pieces coming in? Or is the idea, because it's a different scope and a different size, to kind of always keep it relatively broad? I
think there's opportunities there, wouldn't you say, Parker?
Yeah, I would agree that there are potential releases in the future coming that will tickle your pickle, so to speak.
That is shocking. That looks like it's closer to me than I initially thought on that one. Especially when we see things like some of the flying fortresses, for example, from the Empire on the box art as well, which are absolutely humongous in Dystopian Wars. So I imagine we're not going to see exactly those, but maybe something similar
Yeah, for a start, I want to see one of those as a gaming table at an event somewhere. I want to see a game played across one of those.
I'm just thinking of an 8x4 table that's the deck of an aircraft carrier, and you could play across it. That'd be dope.
100%. And I think like even though you look at the scale of what's in Dystopian Wars, and you think, well, sometimes we can take this concept and scale down. But so the Crown's a great example. The Crown has Guardian generators in Dystopian Wars.
Mm-hmm.
We probably won't see those at Armoured Clash scale because they're huge. The technology is a huge thing, but some of the ideas might come across and then kind of be folded into things that you will see in future releases for the Crown. So anything is possible. And I suppose the main thing is if people really support the game and get into it and that, then the sky's the limit, really.
It's been interesting catching up with you, gentlemen. And if anybody at home has any questions that they want to ask about Armoured Clash and the design, please pop them below and we'll pass them across. And James will say, I'm not answering that.
Of course.
Or he might. He might push it onto Parker's table. You never know. Until next time, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.